Hello there, my name is Patrick and this is CodeXpert channel. In today's video I want to focus on annotations from the integration testing framework. So what are those annotations? Annotations are used in integration tests to provide additional metadata and instructions to the testing framework. They can be used as doc-block annotations or PHP 8 built-in attributes. They can be added to test methods or test classes, and they can modify their behavior during test execution. Right now we are seeing a page from Adobe documentation, and I can say that this page is really well documented, so everything that you need to know about annotations can be found here. So we will not waste time on this. We will get to see some practice examples. So let's just switch to PHP Storm and start with the magentoDbIsolation, which is, I would say, the most important one from all of the tags. For the purpose of this material, I have created sample test classes. So if you want to see those examples and try to run them, you can go and switch the branch to the feature integration test annotation. And we will start, as I said, with the DB isolation test. So let's go open this file first. So why this annotation is so important? As you already know from the previous video, when it comes to integration testing, we do not test the code in isolation. Therefore, we need to make sure that after finishing the test case, we will get back to the previous state of application. So for example, if we create a new product instance, we no longer test the code in isolation, so this product instance will be created, will be saved in database, and if you run the next test case that also is trying to do something with this product, we will reach to conflict. So therefore we will have different results based on the context of our database or application, and we don't want to that. Our test should be always working the same. That's why we can use the magentoDbIsolation to tell Magento that before running a test case, we can start a transaction in database, then we can run the test case, and everything that is done inside of this test case will be later, after finishing the test case, will be rollbacked. So there will never be a commit of this data, so we will get back to the previous state of database after finishing the test case. To show you that on an example, you can see that we have a test create block test case, and we are trying to create a new CMS block. So we are assigning some data, and there is a set identifier, which is a unique field. And then we are saving this CMS block, and later we are trying to get list of all the CMS blocks that are in database, and it should be equal to 1 because we added a CMS block. So if we try to run this code, we will get back to CLI. We will type warden shell to connect to our PHP instance, and we will run this test. So how we can run it? We can use the dev tests run integration, and also we can specify something like that. So we can specify some additional parameters to the PHP unit comment. So if we, for example, add filter, we can filter by test case names or a class test names. So for example, I want to test all of the test methods that are in DB isolation test. So let's just copy that and let's run it. We need to, of course, wait a couple of seconds to see some results. So after it has finished, we can see that everything is fine, it's working. We have OK status here. So let's open a table plus. I have created a connection before recording this video, so we can have access to the Magento integration test and to the CMS block table. So I will refresh the data, and we can see that data was saved here. So what will happen if we run this code again? So let's try and run it. And we can see that there is an error. And why? There is a message, a block identifier with the same properties already exists in the selected store. So we cannot add another CMS block because it's already in the database, right? So what we can do with it? We can use the magentoDbIsolation and change it to enabled. This way, as I said, Magento will roll back everything that was happening inside of the test case methods. So let's get back to table plus, let's remove this block and let's run this command again. So you can see that passed, and let's try it again, and also it has passed. So this means that when using DB isolation, we can always get back to the previous state of database. Now let's go to the magentoDataFixture. So there is a class called DataFixture test, and we can see a couple of methods here. So let's focus right now on the test get product. So above test get product method, we can see the annotation magentoDataFixture, and there is some path to a file. So magentoDataFixture is used to create some data before executing the test case. So for example, we can define that we want to have a product instance in our test case. So let's open this path. And in this file, we can see a lot of things. So we can see that there are some tier pricing added, but yeah, this is what I'm looking for. So we are creating a new instance of product. We are assigning some data. We assign ID, SKU, simple. So we can use, for example, this SKU to load our product in our test case, right? So we have a product instance available. And there are also some additional saving some options and so on. But let's see where this file is located. So this file is located in dev tests, right? Integration, test suite Magento, and in this directory there are some modules that specify those fixtures. So we can see that, for example, in the catalog, Magento catalog directory, there are a lot of files. So we can, for example, create a fixture for categories. We can define like filterable attributes, multiple products, multi-select attributes, and so on. So we have a quite of options right here. Of course, we can create our custom fixture if we need something like that. But let's get back to our test case. And like I said, we can get our product by using the simple SKU. So if we run this test, we will have access to this product and our test should be passing, right? So let's run this test. So we can define that we want to run only test get product. And we can see that, yeah, it actually worked very well. And also there is some additional method, test create new product. So here you can see there is not a path to a fixture. There is a name of method that can be located in our test case class. So here, create simple product. This method is static and it defines what should happen before executing our test case. So it should create some product with simple test product SKU. It will be saved to our database so we can actually use it, right? So let's also run this test create new product. And also it has passed. But what will happen if we, for example, want to try loading the product simple? So let's copy the SKU here. And let's run the test again. And there is an error. The product that was requested doesn't exist. And that's because the magentoDataFixture for the product simple was only run before the test get product. If we want to run, for example, this fixture for every single test case in our test class, we can define it at the class level. So basically all annotations can be defined on the class level or on the method level, and in case you configure it on the method level, it will always override what is on the class level. So for example, magentoDbIsolation can be used for all the methods inside the class, and this is actually what I usually do. I define magentoDbIsolation and magentoAppIsolation here, and everything else is created on the test method, but we'll get back to it later. So to sum up, magentoDataFixture is really powerful because we don't need to create for every single test case how to create a product order and so on. We can use some fixtures that are already defined on Magento integration testing framework. Let's right now go to the next annotation, which will be AppIsolation. So this is something similar to the magentoDbIsolation, but it actually connects to application. So of course, when we run integration tests, Magento is bootstrapping the whole application. And because of it, it can be only created once and run before all of the tests, or it can be created before each single test. And of course, if we create it once and use the same application in every single test case, this will mean that sometimes we will have some data in memory that shouldn't be there if we run, for example, a second or third test case. So this can also lead to conflicts. That's why it's so important to isolate our code. Of course, there is some drawback of it because this will decrease a performance of tests, but this is something that we can trade off, right? Because we want to have always the same results for our test cases. So, for example, in the AppIsolation test, there are two methods. So we can see that we create a new registry object, right? And right now magentoAppIsolation is defined as disabled. And we have test registry key and test empty registry. So if we run this test class, this first class test method should register a test key, and the second one should check if the test key is actually null, because it should be null if we run the second 1, 2, 3, right? So let's run this code. Let's run AppIsolation test and see what will happen. And there is an error. Failed asserting that 1, 2, 3 is null. So you see that in this test method, this registry contains data from the previous test case, and we don't want to do that. So this is a simple test case, we can find it pretty quickly. But when you create integration tests for example, for checkout, when there are a lot of objects, classes and so on, it can be pretty hard to debug. That's why, like I said, I always use magentoDbIsolation and magentoAppIsolation annotations on the class level, so I am always pretty sure that isolation is enabled for database and our application. So let's also do that. Let's change disabled to enabled, and let's run again the same test. And right now you can see two tests are okay. Let's now switch to the next one, which is magentoAppArea. So there is a class called AppArea. Let's go to it, and we can see that there is two methods: testGetFrontendArea and testGetAdminArea. So when it comes to Magento consists of a couple of areas like frontend, admin HTML, web API REST, and so on. So we can define some configurations only for those specific areas. Therefore, in our test cases, we sometimes want to test how our code behaves in different areas. So for example, I will have created a sample like class. It's called configuration, and we can see that this is a pretty simple class. We just store some params array, and in etc directory there are two directories, admin HTML and frontend, and in those directories there is a .xml file. So in the first one, in admin HTML, I defined a virtual type, and I just passed a admin HTML value to a params array, right? And in the frontend .xml, I do the same, but instead of admin HTML, I pass a frontend value. So therefore, if we go to AppArea again, and if we run, for example, this code, we can see that it is defined as magentoAppArea frontend. So this will mean that our code for this test case will be run inside of the frontend area. So we should expect that this configuration get params and area will get a frontend value. And the same for admin HTML, but with different value. So let's just copy the name of this. Let's run CLI again and run the command. And exactly, two tests are okay. So of course, if we switch it, for example, to admin, it will not work, right? Because there is admin HTML, right? and exactly expected admin and actual frontend, right? So it proves that it correctly works. And our last annotation is magentoConfigFixture. So this is yet another powerful fixture from Magento integration testing framework. In Magento, a configuration is stored inside of the core config data table. So if we ever need to save configuration, it will be there. And normally for our test cases, we would need to also save it to database in order to fetch it in our test cases. But with this annotation, we can define what value should be saved for which configuration, and Magento will take care of that. And after executing the test case, this will be rolled back to the previous state. So how it works? magentoConfigFixture consists of 3 elements. The first one is a store, so we can define a configuration per store. Next one is the name of the configuration, and the last one is the value of the configuration. So this is all defined in the documentation page. If we go to Magento ConfigFixture, so we can also see it here, and we can see it in practice. So let's get back, and for example, let's start from the beginning. So right now, if we want to set a configuration for a default store, we create a default prefix for the name of a configuration. If we want to set it for the current store that is right now loaded in our test case, we can use current store. And if we want to set a configuration for a specific store, we need to define a store code and then the prefix store. So why there is a third store? So if we see this magentoDataFixture, if we open this file, I have used a fixture to create some website stores and so on. So we can see here, if we go below, that there is a website with third code, and here is the store with the third store code. So with this, we can use the third store inside of this test case, and then we can add a prefix store. So this will mean that for the third store, this will be saved in our core config data. And of course, we can also use the admin to save some data for admin store. There is also some additional fixture called magentoAppIsolation, but from what I know, this works the same as magentoConfigFixture. This is, I guess, some abbreviation, so you can just save some data for admin store. But I always use the magentoConfigFixture. I've never used that one. So let's see what is inside of the test-get-config method. So we can actually name it test-get-config. So we get value for a default store, then we get value for a store with the ID 1, so this is the current store. Then we want to add a value, get a value for a third store and also for an admin, right? So we can see that those values are matching. So let's run this class. Let's wait. And yeah, we can see that all values are correct. Of course, you can always go to documentation, and there are also some examples. So that would be all. And I hope that on those practical examples, you saw how Magento works and also how we can change the behavior of Magento application in the integration testing framework. So this is only a beginning. You need to get used to those annotations. But once you start practicing, you'll get used to it pretty quickly. In the next videos, I will show you some practical examples of integration testing, and of course we will use annotations there. So thank you for watching and see you in the next video.